How's everybody doing?
Good.
Good to see you. Another awesome turnout. You'll have to forgive me. It is super muggy in this room to the point where we're going to have to go get like a fan, like an external fan, but we're going to get started anyways. Good afternoon and welcome to the April meeting of the DuPage ROSC Council. My name is Jarrett and I'm the coordinator for the DuPage ROSC. Thank you to everybody for coming. Man, this turnout always surprises me. It's so great. I want to start with like a real quick story, and it relates to kind of how we can help others. So one of the like many hats I've worn in my short time in this field was a senior resident at Serenity House in Addison. So like the best way I can describe that job is that it's sort of like a resident advisor for a college, except that instead of college students, I'm around 32 men who are in early recovery. So it's some long days, long hours, and every day is very interesting. Every day is different, 24/7, a lot of interesting experiences. So in my time in that position, I saw hundreds of men of all ages come through this program to like varying degrees of success. There were some guys that struggled, but there were a lot who thrived and were able to recover. I saw guys come in feeling very low and apprehensive about the program and about recovery in general. And then I saw them leave 90 days later with their heads held very high. This weekend, I got a call from one of those guys. When he got to Serenity House a couple of years ago, he was not sure if this was the place for him. He was very apprehensive, very nervous. So I spent some time with him his first week here, just to see that he was doing okay, that he was finding his footing, just taking an extra 5 minutes here and there to make sure I spent that time with him. He did get into the swing of things. He got a great job. He got a job from a tip from another client here, kind of got his footing, started going to meetings and really started to get into what recovery meant. And he wasn't a special case or anything. This is the type of thing that I, appreciated doing for every client that came through here. So fast forward about a year and a half later, and I get that text from him. He was graduating from drug court after 2 years, and he wanted to let me know and to thank me for taking the time to make sure that he was okay when he first got here, because he was planning on leaving after that first day. But after talking to me and some others, he decided to stick it out. Now, I'm not telling this story to try to give myself any credit for this, actually just the opposite. Sometimes we help people in recovery when we don't even know it. So we always have to remember to be kind and to be patient to folks in early recovery and do our best to meet them where they're at. So thank you for bearing with me on that story. I always like to start with some stories of recovery, just to kind of show that what we're doing makes a difference, even when we don't know what it is that we're doing when we're helping. So we're going to look at some agendas for today's meeting. Let me share the screen here with you. Can everybody see? All right, perfect. So for today's meeting, we just got through the open, going over the agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about next month's meeting, an event that's coming with it, which is very exciting. We have our presentation today from Bruce, CEO of Leyden Family Services in the SHARE program, on how trauma can impact development, behavior, and drug use. It's very exciting. Bruce and I got a chance to meet yesterday to go over it a little bit, and I'm very, very excited to have him here. We're going to leave time for organizational updates. So that's when we're going to hear from you. And that's an important part because we want to hear what y'all are doing. What are some things that you're working on and how can we help? We'll go over at the end a little bit about our Recovery Coach Academy. We'll give you some updates on the next training, which will be in Kane County. And then at the end, we'll do a little closing. If you were able to make it last month, we had Liam and Christy from Faces and Voices of Recovery talking about leadership and asset mapping. If anyone misses the meetings, the videos are up on our YouTube page, and I always enter those in the emails after the meeting. So I'll make sure that y'all see those. That's the best way. If people can't make the meetings, the best way to go back and see those. Or if you have somebody that's interested in ROSC, wants to know what we're about, you can always send them the links to those videos. So next month, it is Mental Health Month. So we're going to be talking about co-occurring disorders, but more importantly, we have a coffee house event afterwards with Eternal Buzz Cafe. They've been a great partner of Serenity House and ROSC since the beginning. And let me tell you something. I was in recovery coach training with a couple of them They make homemade scones that is just more than enough reason to come out and check that out. So our meeting is at 3. If you want to come out and be here in person, like a couple of folks here are, you can do that. And then stay afterwards for some fresh coffee and some treats from Eternal Buzz Cafe. We'll go till 6. If you can't make it, just stop by on the way home from work. We'll be excited to have you. I think as we kind of ease back into in-person things, this type of stuff is going to be really important for us. So in-person meetings as much as we can, come and get to know each other, and then see, what we're all doing. So I'm very, very excited about that. Let me switch my share real quick. So we also have coming up this week will be our community needs assessment going out. I have never in my life worked this hard on 20 questions about substance use. It sounds very easy. I've sent this through about 3 different editors. I've met with an adjunct faculty member. I was told, maybe, I wouldn't say dumb down the language, but think about who your audience is. So this is going to be 20 questions that are going out about substance use and mental health services in DuPage County. This is very important. So this is going to be out for about a month. And when we get the data back, we're going to analyze that, and then we can see how we want to spend some of our resources and our efforts based on the gaps that we find in services. I've done so many assessments of services already in DuPage County and helping build the ROSC. So I can tell you, some of the things we already know, like sober housing, needing more sober housing, needing more peer recovery support stuff. But you know what? There's a lot of blind spots. So what works in our organization may be completely different from yours. So this is going to be going out in an email, probably every email I send you for the next month. But we need to get this to as many people as possible. So y'all could help us out in a big way. If you have intra-agency email stuff where you send it out to all the people in your organization, if you have a mailing list where you have people that maybe your former clients that go out to, we want to get this out to as many people as possible. So if that sounds like something that you might be able to do through your organization, please let me know, because the more answers we can get on this, the better. I will also put a link to this in the chat towards the end of the meeting. So please, everybody, take a look at that when you get a chance. It's going to be very, very helpful for what we do with the ROSC moving forward. So thank you for that. Okay, with that early housekeeping out of the way, we're about ready to get to our speaker here, Bruce Sewick, in just a second. Before I throw it to him, though, we wanted to play this short video. For those of you that were here last month, I played a video and there was no audio. I have fixed it this time. That is not going to happen again, technology. But this gives a little taste of, hang on one second here. Just a little taste of what Bruce is going to be getting into. And then we will throw it over to him in just a second. So I'm going to ask that somebody gives me a thumbs up on the Zoom if they can hear this, okay? All right, let's go.
My mantra under addiction is not why the addiction, but why the pain. If you want to look at what causes addiction, you have to look at the benefit of addiction. What did it do for you? People will say, typically, it gave me pain relief, escape from stress, it gave me a sense of connection, a sense of belonging. The addiction met some essential human need that otherwise wasn't even met in that person's life. So all of these states of lacking connection, of being isolated, of having pain, of having too much stress in your life, these are states of emotional pain. And when you look at populations of addicts, what you find is that the more adversity in childhood, exponentially, the greater the risk of addiction. Which doesn't mean that every person traumatized will become an addict, but it does mean that every addict was traumatized. In my opinion, an addiction is manifested in any behavior that a person finds temporary pleasure or relief in, but suffers negative consequences as a result of, and does not give up or cannot give up despite those negative consequences. Tobacco, alcohol, substances of all kinds. It could also be related to sex, gambling, shopping, eating, work. Virtually any area of human activity can become addictive depending on the person's relationship to it. I had 2 major addictions in my life. One was to work, and I also an addiction to shopping, in my case for classical music, CDs. One day I spent $8,000 on compact discs, It doesn't matter how many sets of a particular composer's symphonies you already have. You have to get the next one and the next one. In the grip of the shopping fever, I once left a patient in labor and actually went downtown to get a disc, and I missed the delivery. That's how impactful it was. Now, you may think that's laughable. How can you compare your addiction to those of your heroin-addicted patients? My heroin-addicted patients, when I told them about my addictions, they didn't laugh, or they shook their heads and they said, yeah, doc, we get it. You're just like the rest of us. Well, the point is that we're all just like the rest of us. The greatest myth around addiction, number one, that is genetic. Now, it does run in families, but why does it run in families? If I'm an alcoholic and if I yelled and screamed at my kids and then they grow up to soothe themselves with alcohol, did I pass that on to them genetically? Or is that a behavior they developed because I recreated the same conditions that I grew up in? Now, there might be genetic predisposition, but a predisposition is not the same as a predetermination. The other myth around addiction is that it's a choice that people make. And the whole legal system is based on the idea that people are choosing to be addicts. Let's punish them for it so as to deter others. Addiction is not a choice anybody makes, it's a response to emotional pain. The other myth is that addiction is restricted to the substance user or to a few losers in our society. It's rife and rampant through our culture. You would think that with the utter failure of most treatment modalities when it comes to addiction, we would wake up and ask ourselves, do we really understand this condition? But that doesn't seem to happen. We're not looking at its real nature as a response to human suffering, because really not helping people work through and resolve their traumas. So we keep saying, what's wrong with you? Instead of asking, what happened to you?
All right, so that was a nice taste of what we're about to get here from our guest. I'm going to stop sharing real quick. So now that we've been illuminated a little bit, I'm excited to turn it over to Bruce Sewick, who a lot of you know. Bruce is the CEO of Leyden Family Services and the SHARE program, which is in Hoffman Estates. I actually first met Bruce at an event. I want to say it was maybe an overdose awareness event over the summer at the Kenneth Young Center. And I was like very, very green in this field. I think that was like maybe my first month of going out and doing outreach. So I didn't really know what I was doing yet. But Bruce like took the time to talk to me. And even though I maybe didn't do the best job of explaining what ROSC was, he got it. And I think he understood and could see the importance of a group like this. And he's been here since the very first meeting. I don't think he's missed a single one. So he's a very valuable member of what we're doing. So Bruce, I'm very happy to turn it over to you now. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Is this full screen that you can see, or because you can see it full screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So Gabor Mate is an expert on trauma. I mean, the three people that I like to read and kind of espouse their theories are Gabor Mate, Bruce Perry, and Bessel van der Kolk. So I'm going to use some of their theories and make sense of it all from a much larger perspective. So we got to start off with the neurodevelopmental organization. It proceeds from the inside, from the back to the front, and from the inside out. So, and it mirrors the nature, timing, and pattern of the experience. When a child experiences chaos, neglect, or threat, violence, it impacts their development, and the potential is blunted, which results in abnormal development and functioning of the brain's stress response system. Now, stress in and of itself is not always harmful. However, trauma is. When stress is predictable and moderate and controlled, the child can learn resilience. They can effectively learn to regulate themselves. But when it starts to fall in the realm of trauma, and is unpredictable, severe, and prolonged, this can result in and facilitate a vulnerability and increase the risk for behavioral problems and counterproductive coping mechanisms. So that's important to know because there is a difference. Trauma produces physiological changes, and Dr. Bessel van der Kolk says all trauma is pre-verbal. So it's remembered as images, sounds, and physical sensations with intense emotions. So that's why it's very hard to find the right modality to give people relief like that, and why oftentimes they turn to maladaptive coping, such as drug and other process addictions. It also recalibrates the brain's alarm system, and it increases the stress hormone activity, which I'll show you physiologically what that looks like, and also alterations in the information filtering system, because you're looking at it through the lens of trauma. So chronic stress activates this axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, by releasing glucocorticoids, which play an important role in the adaptive features to stress, the psychological components of that. This can result in neuronal damage and brain pathologies, including, as we alluded to earlier, maladaptive coping mechanisms. Anything that releases dopamine is something that feels good. So substance misuse, process addictions, and risky behavior can result in dopamine releasing activities, which is reinforcing. So this is kind of what it looks like. So the hypothalamus there that you see at the top part at around 12 o'clock responds to the cortisol from the stress, and it releases hormones that impact the way you react to the stress. So it sets up this sequence that is almost unstoppable. As I said, the traumatized people have a tendency to superimpose their trauma on everything around them, and then that impacts the way things are deciphered when things are going on around them. They tend to see that in kind of a trauma lens. The adverse childhood events that Dr. Matei talked about can predict increased opioid use and also health and social problems. This ACE study was one of the classic studies that kind of opened our eyes. I mean, the demonization of drugs is kind of a reductionist philosophy. We need to get at the root of what causes people to use drugs. And if you're brought up in an environment of physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, domestic violence, parental substance abuse, mental illness, suicide or death, or crime or imprisoned family members, those can impact your development and can facilitate, can make one gravitate toward something that kind of takes this away. So then the task, and this is the polyvagal expert, Dr. Porges. So the task then after trauma is to reset the physiological states regulated by the autonomic nervous system. So the survival mechanisms that's responsible for our survival don't work against them. So the level of perceived safety is something that we have to look at, and that depends on the physiological state that is activated. So when we are threatened, we cycle through 3 physiological states. The first is social engagement. So you call out for help, support, or comfort, and then if no one comes to our aid and we are in immediate danger, the second state is fight or flight. So we either fight or run to a safe place. And if we can't get away or are held down or trapped, then the third stage is freezing or collapsing and shutting down. So you kind of need to know that cycle to understand how to best address that. So deactivating the fight or flight shutdown and circumventing the defensive mechanisms, if it's not related to survival, the best approach is to use what is called top-down approaches with bottom-up methods. So top-down approach is social engagement, having conversations, being able to vocalize and watch facial communication. And the bottom-up methods help to calm the body's physical tensions, such as arranging chairs, foot tapping, play techniques, rhythmically attuned movements, etc. So the best approach is to combine both of these methods. Many programs ignore this need to engage the safety mechanism of the brain before trying to promote new ways of thinking. And this is the fallacy here, is if you don't recognize what the brain is going through, you're going to have a difficult time promoting new ways of thinking. And we're talking about therapy and so forth. So, and I think Bessel van der Kolk puts it best, the last things that should be cut from school schedules are physical education, recess, and anything else involving movement, play, and joyful engagement. When children are oppositional, defensive, and numbed out or enraged, it's important to recognize that what is deemed bad behavior may repeat action patterns that were established essentially to survive threats. So if the child is using that as a way to self-regulate and you cut that off from them, then how can you expect them to learn? So somatosensory regulations such as rhythmic activities, I've referred to that, walking, rocking, fiddling with things while listening to music, with earbuds while doing homework, actually helps regulate and open up the cortex to make reasoning parts of the brain more accessible for learning. And this is Dr. Bruce Perry, who, by the way, along with Oprah Winfrey, wrote a great book that I recommend called What Happened to You, which Dr. Gabor Mate said, instead of asking what's wrong with you, the first question should be what happened to you. So helping children regulate is the key to know what to do in a trauma awareness school. First you regulate, then you relate, and then you reason. So these quotes were taken from the book that I just mentioned. So there is this correlation between childhood trauma and drug and alcohol addiction. Trauma victims often develop serious mental illness for which they turn to drugs and alcohol. Sad to say, more than a third of adolescents with a report of abuse and neglect will have a substance use disorder before they reach their 18th birthday. 55 to 60% of PTSD victims end up developing some form of chemical dependency. And abuse and sexual molestation are major negative environmental factors. More than 75% of female addicts suffered from incest, molestation, or physical abuse as a child or an adult. I take this presentation to the police departments because they are looking at things from a police lens, for frequent phone calls to overdose sites. If they had an idea of what caused that, they can treat people more compassionately. So I'm always happy to present to police departments on this. So the why of addiction, kind of bring it all together. So that addictive behavior hijacks and subverts what essentially was a survival mechanism part of the brain, the old primitive, the old brain. As I said, the brain develops from the back to the front and the inside out. So the primitive part, the first to develop, is always concerned about survival. And that is something that when you're using drugs and these coping mechanisms, maladaptive coping mechanisms, the primitive brain remembers the experience and how it's felt. And these memories then can be very reinforcing and can trigger the behavior. So what happens then is emotions, rather than objective reasoning, often decide whether or not to continue using. So the memory of that pleasure of addictive behavior maintains that equation, because behaviorally, anything that is positively reinforced is maintained. That's why as a teacher, your biggest competitor for the student's attention is the digital phones, because that is more reinforcing than the teacher. How can I reinforce that many times? You send a text, you get a text back. The other half of the equation is the person's vulnerability to addictive behavior, which is caused by neurochemical changes as a result of this addiction. The survival reinforcement circuit, as I said, is located in the old brain, so it acts as more of a go switch. The new brain acts as a stop switch. But what happens is with repeated misuse, the brain chemistry switches and the go switch becomes more powerful than the stop switch. Again, remember that it initiated in the primitive part of the brain, which is what keeps you in a survival mode. And if you think about it from what we were saying about ACEs, this is oftentimes how people can survive. Things like, substance use, misuse, disassociation. So essentially what starts as a want becomes a false need. So why the increased use of heroin? Well, when you look at the effects of heroin, aside from the pain relief, it also drowns out emotional pain. So you have a decreased sense of anxiety, detachment and numbing of unwanted feelings. Somebody once described it as feeling like a warm, soft hug. It results in a rush, and this euphoria results in excessive dopamine, which imprints itself biologically on the brain's memory. And of course, the war on drugs is an abysmal failure because heroin is inexpensive and easy to get. So interdiction doesn't work. This is one of my favorite quotes by Russell Brand. The priority of any addict is to anesthetize the pain of living, to ease the passage of day with some purchased relief. And here is my bibliography. So I thought maybe if we have the time, we could have a discussion of this, because I think many of us know this, but it's surprising how many people do not understand this. And they see this, the misuse of some of the things we talked about, as more of a flaw in somebody's character, not understanding that this could be the result of a traumatic upbringing. So anybody have any comments?
If anybody wants to chime in, go ahead and unmute yourself, or you can raise your little hand icon. I'll just kind of kick it off real quick. That was amazing, because I feel like that was a lot of the stuff that I felt like I was going through at a younger age, and also when I was in my active addiction. I didn't hear about fight or flight till a little bit later in life, but once I really understood what it was and what it meant, I realized that I had been spending a majority of my life in fight or flight mode. That was sort of like my neutral, my standby was fight or flight. And I realized, looking back, that I was using mostly just to get out of that mode. I tried explaining it to somebody once, kind of being like in that zone all the time. It's just exhausting. I mean, you could just be sitting around all day with no physical activity, but if your mind is in that fight or flight mode all the time, it's mentally and physically exhausting. So you'll go to any lengths just to not feel that. And that was sort of what kept me in that cycle. I didn't have some of the more, traditional childhood trauma. I started for different reasons, but trauma becomes a cycle, because once I started using, I put myself in positions that became extremely traumatic, and some positions that I still to this day tend to try and minimize, or at least I did in my early recovery. So, things like, homelessness, incredibly traumatic. If you're trying to make it on the streets in the city for, a year, almost 2 years, that's an incredibly traumatic experience for a lot of people. Major health issues, I had to go through cancer a couple of times. I still, to this day, probably minimize it more than I should, but it was a very traumatic experience. So to be able to find those root causes, understand not only what it's doing to you mentally, but also physically, exactly how it is tricking your brain, to want to get, to obtain and use, just to not feel that way. It's once I learned that stuff, it was just incredibly important. And it was a great presentation, Bruce. Thank you very much. If anybody else wants to chime in, go ahead.
I want to say one thing too. One of the things Bruce Perry found was he could tell which kids were traumatized by the resting heartbeat, because the ones that were traumatized, their resting heartbeat was higher than the rest. That was their baseline. So everyone thought that was magic, but not really when you understand how this kind of came about. And I think that Gabor Mate put it very well when he said, not everyone that was traumatized becomes an addict, but every addict is traumatized and could be, the result of many things. And I think that this is very important to know. So with that, I open up to the group.
Bruce, Kathleen, person with lived experience and student and part of ROSC. I appreciate you coming out. I can relate, like Jared, as a person with lived experience with some childhood trauma, started addiction around 21, had some behavioral through grade school, and there were, always seeking to get help for me, but the underlying issue was never addressed, and having, that's almost like a re-traumatization and I know as a young adult looking to seek or blame, and not understanding the realigning, neurologically, I really appreciate the understanding that it was like the survival mechanism that makes sense to me, to implement something that helped me survive, so I'm grateful to be alive and be still striving. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your feedback. Anybody else?
Hi, I'm Rebecca.
Hey, Rebecca.
So I got a lot out of that. I like the part where it was talking about the brain grows from the inside out and then the back forward. It gave me a really good visual because I'm currently trying to like wire my own thinking. And yeah, so that was really good. And then also there was something else, I forgot what it was. Now I'm catching my tongue, but thank you for sharing. I got a lot out of it.
Thank you. It's important to know how the brain develops, because then you could see how when it is rewired not the way it's supposed to be, how difficult it is to reset, what has been put into place so the person survived. I mean, I think I learned a lot. One of the most complex clients that I've worked with had a history of being sexually abused by her father and physically abused by her mother. And so she was given a diagnosis of schizophrenia secondary to active alcoholism. And nobody ever asked her about her past, and she would disappear from my program and show up on a Monday pretty battered and in bad shape. And I had asked her, I said, do you feel like there's other people inside you? And the answer was yes. She started crying. She, as a way to survive the trauma of being sexually abused by her father and physically abused by her mother for having sex with her father. I mean, I can't see how you could. So she just disassociated with that and became, her diagnosis was, the old borderline personality, dissociative identity disorder. That's what she did to survive, along with drinking profusely. And then, sad to say, I speculated that she ended up eliciting the kind of sexual partners that recreated what must have happened in her childhood, because whenever I found her, she was beaten about the face and didn't remember anything that happened. And so that really kind of drove it home to me because nobody had ever asked what happened to her. She just had the diagnosis that was being treated medically and therapeutically, but nobody had asked her to the degree that I had in that context, if she had other people inside of her, because that was the way she survived, by having other identities take over when she felt triggered.
That was the comment that I was going to make. Instead of saying what's wrong with you, say what's happened to you. Exactly.
And I think that opens the door to discussions, because that puts it in a different perspective. And I think that's very important, because so much of what transpires in when you're working with somebody can depend on the way you kind of start off. And if you're going to start off with that, as opposed to, what happened to you, tell me what happened to you and how this helped that, then you're kind of aligning yourself with the client and to help them better understand why they've arrived at this point, and that the fact that they did it was a question of survival and not a character flaw. It was not their fault.
Hi, I'm Jenny. In the program, worked for a second in the field. First of all, The Body Keeps the Score is a ridiculously good book. Absolutely amazing. And having spent a number of years in the program, I probably should have realized more so the effect that trauma had on addiction. However, I'm also a student, and I learned quite a little bit, and I'm still learning quite a little bit. It's stuff that I kind of wish I had known going into simply even just working as a tech at a treatment center, because looking back on that experience, it's kind of reshaped how I maybe would have handled certain situations with some of the clients, or maybe how I would have processed some of the clients' reactions to me, you know, just knowing a little bit more about that sort of history. But really interesting, really great presentation.
Thank you.
Everyone should read that book. It's amazing.
Yeah, that, and as I recommend, What Happened to You by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. So The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, and Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey's book. I mean, Oprah herself was a victim of abuse, and so she would kind of tell the story, and then Bruce Perry would explain physiologically what happened. And once you understand that, I think it forever opens your eyes to a better way of working with people.
Hey, Bruce, it's Sonny.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can,
Ron,
Sonny.
I don't have a, okay, great. Awesome presentation. And I certainly appreciate the introduction and the, you know, what's happened to you. When do you believe that question should come about? After the rapport is built and the confidentiality is established, before you go into any type of assessment or any of that sort of stuff, screening?
Yes.
The what's happened to you should come out?
Yes.
Not right away, not when you walk in.
Well, I think that
What would you say would be a good lead?
Yeah, I think pretty quickly on, you know, because I think it sets the stage and sets the tone for what you're going to do by somebody realizes that you're asking what happened to them, and they'd be more apt to. So I think it should be very early on in the, you know, if you want to call it assessment, because the assessments are so formal. We have to, for those of you that have to do the IMCANs, it's a very onerous thing to put somebody through. And, you know, having to go through 17 pages of an assessment because some bureaucrat said to do it is traumatizing in and of itself. So I think that kind of
Correct.
sets the stage, and it should be early on because they realize that you have a different ear to what, you know, what is going to proceed from there. So I think it's a very good way to start off. I mean, obviously you have to kind of do the warm up.
Perfect. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you, Sonny.
I'm so glad that you said the assessments are traumatizing within themselves, because I'm in recovery, and that's one of the reasons why I never want to use again, because I'll have to go through another one of those long, drawn out questionnaires when you go into rehab or you go, you know.
Yeah, you know what, is asking people those questions over and over again. And then, you know, I've had that experience when you're with somebody trying to get them admitted. I had a loved one in that situation, and to spend time with them doing intake after intake to try to meet the criteria that the insurance companies, you know, have set. And that's kind of the problem. We just had an experience here where one of our clients that has a substance abuse problem and is smoking crack, when he did the intake and was reported to the insurance and we started treating him, the insurance rejected it because they said he reported twice a week, which is not true. They said twice a week is not considered a problem. So now he has in his head that he does not have a problem. And that has created its own problem, because to him that's a license to use, because he didn't meet the insurance company's criteria for inpatient substance abuse when he most definitely needed it. And that, I think, is kind of one of the failures of the system that I think need to be addressed somehow. I mean, I get on my, you know, I start pontificating, but that did more damage to him, because he's going to end up being asked to leave the program, because now he's got, as far as he's concerned, he has the okay from the insurance companies to proceed. So we got to take the message back to them. I mean, the problem isn't necessarily availability of treatment facilities. It's to straighten the insurance companies out so people can get treatment when they need it. And then the clinicians need to be trauma informed and be able to approach it from that compassionate point of view to open the doors to working with somebody.
Yeah, and Bruce, I just want to add, and we'll kind of wrap up here if anybody else doesn't have any questions or comments, but you know, in terms of working with clients and working with fellow people in recovery, as trauma goes, that's what I really learned and appreciated about roles like peer recovery support specialist, which is, you know, if a person is going into treatment, you know, they have 30, 60, maybe 90 days, depending. And it can oftentimes be difficult to build a rapport, like with a counselor in that short amount of time, which is, you know, why I really appreciate a role like peer recovery support specialist, where you get to kind of, you know, follow them for a little bit longer period of time and kind of build that trust, but also you can inform them as you build a relationship, and however you feel about disclosing, you can talk to them about your own trauma and get to the point where they feel comfortable in sharing some of those things. Because I'll tell you, and I'll be very honest about it, as a man, I had a lot of issues talking about trauma because I was sort of under the assumption that, like, you know, I had to have stiff upper lip. We don't talk about some of that stuff. Anyway, in the long run, it was killing me. So I had to get to the point where I could have that vulnerability. And it took being in extended stay residential places. I wasn't going to get to the bottom of it in 30 days. It just wasn't going to happen. So that's why I'm such a huge proponent of extended stay, you know, halfway houses, sober living. You can start to develop those relationships with people over time where you feel comfortable doing that sort of disclosure and, you know, informing people and working on your own trauma. I just think it's one of the most crucial things to recovery.
Real quick, just a shout out. I am originally from King County, and that Sheriff Hain currently is a very progressive sheriff in King County. He has a recovery pod separate from the women, for the men specifically. The women do have the program, but the men specifically have a separate pod for a recovery pod. And in that pod that I'm learning about, I'm going to interview one of the co-workers on this pod through Lighthouse this evening. They address that. They address the childhood trauma of gangs, of violence, of street, of criminalization, of the trauma. So for men, like Jared was talking about, with that pride and the hardness of, it's not just pride, it's, you know, it's ingrained in the gender and whatever, that you're not vulnerable, you know, and they are addressing that within that pod prior to sentencing, prior to, they're working within that program to get people, you know, addressing that and looking at it with therapists, with, you know, clinicians, and creating a safe space to addressing that for the men. The women also have the availability, but they just don't have the numbers of the women to make its own pod entity. So I just wanted to give a shout out to them, because I think that's an awesome program, and DuPage should look into that for implementing something within a criminalization atmosphere of addressing the root problem. Because it, you know, like you were talking about, Bruce, it's not just addiction. If there's usually any maladaptive behavior, there's something behind it.
Right.
Well, Bruce, thank you so much, man. It's always been a pleasure having you as a part of the ROSC, and
Thank
that
you,
presentation was amazing. And I look forward to continued collaborations with you.
Thank you.
So thank you again. Would you say the name of those books one more time for people who maybe
Sure,
caught it late?
it's The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, K-O-L-K, and What Happened to You by Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry. I
Phenomenal.
think that should be mandatory reading if you're in the, you know, if you're working with people in the field.
That's great. And I'll include those in my follow-up emails with the recording in the minutes. So I'll make sure we take care of that. So thank you again, Bruce.
Thank you.
We're into the last 15 minutes or so here. I wanted to leave a decent amount of time to talk about some organizational updates. So that means what y'all are working on. It's important, not only so like we can get an idea of some of the issues that we might be able to help with, But just letting us know what's happening. One of the biggest things when we were putting together the ROSC, and I heard this phrase for the first time back then, was de-siloing, which is like basically a fancy word for we're only working on our own things and not really knowing what everybody else is doing. So I've got a couple of updates that I'll throw on here in a second, but I wanted to open up to the floor just to hear about what are some of the goals that you have in your organizations, what are some of the barriers that you've run into, and how can we as a ROSC or as fellow members of other organizations, how can we fill those gaps by working together? So if anybody has something cool they want to throw out, please do.
Hi, everyone. Becky Sadler with Rosecrans. I thought, Jared, the timing was appropriate with the survey you're sending out with services in DuPage County. So Rosecrans has heard it loud and clear, and we are opening in May in Warrenville, bringing adult IOP and adolescent teen IOP. Yeah, I'm so excited. It's a great space. Our open house is April 21st from 3 to 6. But it will be working, you know, with Medicaid and insurance. So still trying to serve everybody in the general area. So the teen IOP will be in the evening so the kids can remain in school. And then the adult IOP will be from 10:30 to 1:30. So I put my contact information in the chat if anybody is interested in the open house or touring at another time. But yeah, we are finally coming to DuPage County. So nice to see so many new faces. This is my first time. So I was happy to meet Jared at a conference and learn about this great organization.
Yeah, thanks, Becky. I'll make sure to include that information in the email, and ROSC members are going to be at that open house. So we will see you out there. And like Becky said, if you would like, please feel free to put your name and contact info in the chat. I've already, with quite a few members, shared the resources, and they've made great connections outside of the meetings. So whatever you feel comfortable putting in the chat, please do, and I'll include those in a resource guide that I send out to people. So what else are we working on? Who's got something?
Well, as always, I will be out in West Chicago on Fridays from 2 to 4 p.m. Giving harm reduction services. I believe you're coming out, what is that, next week, Jarrett, to have a look at the truck?
Yeah, we're going to be out there a week from this Friday. So yeah, next Friday.
Yeah. Great, yeah.
We're going to be out there checking it out again.
Nice.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to see some adult IOP that would accommodate the working people. You know, a lady from Rosecrans just mentioned 10:30 to 1:30, I believe, or 12:30. Well, people that are working, they want the live meetings, but it's not accommodating to them. So if I can get with these resources, we're in 12 hospitals, and we've signed up with 29 hospitals. So I've got a team of what's soon to be 29 engagement specialists, and we're looking for resources, especially those that'll take Medicaid, because the hospitals cherry pick, of course, the commercial insurance, and they give us meaning the Gateway Foundation, primarily the Medicaid clientele. And, I had one today that she works 8 to 4 and she wants an IOP, and, having a hard time trying to accommodate her. So this resource list is going to be invaluable for myself, and I'll be more than happy to share it with my team. They'll be, ecstatic to find out what's out there. So keep up the good work, bro. You're doing a super job with this ROSC.
Thanks, Sonny. I think Patty from Haas put something in the chat about an IOP they have in the evening. Serenity House has some IOP stuff as well. But maybe that seems like something that could be like a specific resource contact that I put out, which is just the options for IOP and PHP in the area. Because I think the more the better. And don't get me started on the insurance stuff, because I think I could talk about that until the rest of the meeting. So I don't want to take up your time with that. So does anybody else have something they are working on or maybe want some help with?
Hello, first timers here, Matt and Jen from the Way Back In. Way Back In, we are located in Maywood. We're actually a long-term residential treatment program for drugs, alcohol, and gambling. We are here because we are looking for any help we can get. We are opening up Oxford houses around the Chicagoland area, DuPage included. For our Oxford houses, we have one Oxford house in Melrose Park that has been full for about a year now, which is great. But we are needing some help finding other locations for single family homes that could approximately fit 6 non-related individuals in it. And of course, once we get new locations, we are going to need help filling them. So hopefully with everyone's help, we would be able to accommodate that.
Yeah, thanks, Shaw. I saw Courtney Ross from Oxford House on the call at some point. I don't know if she's still in here, but as somebody who's recently, like I said, done a lot of assessments about sober living out here in DuPage, Oxford House, it's great that they're expanding because there was a ton of them up in Lake County, some down in Joliet, but DuPage traditionally we didn't really have any. I know there's men and women's, I believe, in Lisle, and there's also a house in Woodridge that opens. And Oxford House's website is really good about listing vacancies. It's usually always up to date, but there has been a good push to open up more and more out here in DuPage because there's just such a lack of it, unfortunately.
Yes,
So
yeah, we got a grant through the state of Illinois, so ours will actually be MAT friendly. So Suboxone and methadone. Like I said, we just need some help finding more locations. If anyone knows of anybody that knows any houses for rents, and of course, once we acquire the location, we need help filling them. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
nice to have you here.
Hey, Bruce, Andrea stepped away. Do you want to talk about the CRSS program at COD?
That's a good, thank you for that prompt. College of DuPage received a grant from the state of Illinois to start a CRSS program. And it's starting this fall at the College of DuPage. There's, let's see, there's 2, 3, there's 4 courses and an internship, a 300-hour internship. And it meets the requirements to take the CRSS test. The thing that I have found, we have consumer recovery support they actually are eligible for it, is how do you get this formal training? Because the state has kind of done it ad hoc by sending out webinars and having meetings and so forth. But now they've kind of gone about it with a more formalized way. And they poured a lot of money into it as an attempt also, I think, to kind of shore up some of the shortages that we're experiencing severely here with waiting lists because of the staff shortage. So if anybody has any questions on it, you can contact me. I've been teaching at COD for about 20 years now. It's a nice adjunct to working in the field because I try to keep it real because most of the stuff that you end up dealing with is not stuff you can find in the index. So.
And in that, the grant pays for all the tuition and transportation and computer.
Yep.
So it's really a great avenue to get into working in the field if you're a person with lived experience.
And childcare too, and helps with the clothing allowance for job placement and so forth. So it's quite liberal to put a lot of money into this to get this thing moving forward. So thanks for that reminder, Kathleen. Much appreciated.
All right. We only got about 4 or 5 minutes left. Does anybody have anything else they want to get out there here in this last minute of this part?
I do.
Becca?
I just started, I just sanctioned an NA meeting for women's issues at 210 West Willow Street in Wheaton. And it's brand new. There's only like 5 people there. Like I said, I sanctioned it, so it's gonna be on the internet soon. But yeah, I would like to just get that out there that that's available to women for women's issues.
What day, honey?
Monday from 7 to 8.
Could you, Becca, could you put that in the chat and then I'll include it in the email to everybody? Okay, now I have a couple of things to share. Let me get back to something here. First off, speaking of positions in the field, can everybody see this? So we were fortunate enough recently to get a grant through a group called Recovery Corps. And they are a group that helps placement with positions in the field. So we are going to be filling a couple of positions. One is for a project coordinator and one is for a recovery navigator. I put these up for now on the DuPage ROSC Facebook group, which if you're not a member yet, please join us. That's where I put a lot of our news. There's a whole lot of information on there with links to everything about the position, but you would be working here as a ROSC coach. There'd probably be some outreach and some other things, but it's a growing thing. Not only the recovery coaching department here at Serenity House, but the ROSC and what the coaches are doing with the ROSC. So if that's something that interests you, please go check that out. Again, I'll include it with all the resources here at the end of the week. But we look forward to, meeting some people who might be interested in getting to the field, because it would be a good start there. And they'll also take care of things like, I think $7,000 in past education. So if you've got a student or future, if you've got some student debts, also some childcare, amongst other things. So some good benefits. So they're looking to help take care of you on that. Next up, since we were already talking a little bit about training, I'm going to touch on our upcoming recovery coach training because we do one as well. We do it quarterly. It's through the Connecticut Community Addiction Recovery. And it is going to be taking place this time in Kane County. We're expanding to the great county of Kane. We've been doing it here at Serenity House for a while, but we really are trying to expand and get some different areas. This is free. Let me go over a little bit of the details here. 25 CEUs, and the dates are here. So it's 3 consecutive weekends on a Friday and a Saturday, and that's it. The only fee for this is a $50 materials fee, but everything else is free, and it's part of what we built in for the ROSC doing this training. We've done this quarterly, and unfortunately, Holly Brunton, who is my partner, is not able to be here right now, but she is the one that's been doing the training. She does an amazing job. I know there's a handful of us on this call and in this room who've done the training, and it's really, really enlightening. There was so much stuff that I learned from it about, cultural competency to, the different pathways to recovery, to really what it means to listen when someone's telling you their story. So it's phenomenal. I highly recommend it. It's going to be at the Quad County Urban League in Aurora. So this will be put out in an email as well. We got the contact information here. Spaces are limited. So as soon as you see this, think you want to do it, please reach out. Do not hesitate, and I will help facilitate that. I'm going to talk about this one more time because next month, again, it is our coffee house night. So May 11th. Wednesday, May 11th, 3 to 6 p.m. Come out and see us. I guarantee you there's going to be an espresso machine, homemade scones. It's going to be awesome. Multiple ROSC members are going to be here. We really want to make this a monthly thing. Now, some of y'all have been coming in personally today. I've got, 3 awesome people that showed up. We want to try to get more of y'all in person. And I understand work day is a little bit difficult, but if you can make it out here after on the way home from work, please do. So the next meeting will be Wednesday, May 11th. You will obviously be hearing from me. Y'all are not sick of my emails yet, so I appreciate that. It's the best way we can do that. But check out that Facebook page, DuPage ROSC on Facebook. And you can also search for DuPage ROSC on YouTube to see our YouTube channel. So we're really looking to do that. If you might be interested in helping us out with social media, that's another thing that we could use. So if you have a little bit of background or experience in that, reach out to me and we can have a conversation. But there's only so much that I can do with the hours that I have in a day. So I could definitely use some help with social media. I got about 1 minute left. Does anybody have anything else before we close? All right, that's it. I won't hold y'all hostage. Thank you so much for coming as always. And we will see you a month from now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jared.
And thanks,
Take
Bruce,
care.
again for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks,
you very
Bruce.
much.
Thanks, Jarrett. Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks, Bruce.
Thanks,
Happy
Bruce.
Easter, everyone.
Who, Bruce?